time are we on?
So you've just gone 2. Do film nights.
What's the name, sorry?
I think you should just do one. Maybe one more sort of. Grab yourself a blue like that, you can adjust it at the back.
Too much hair. I told you to bring your coat.
Why is this a bit scary? Is it a bit scary?
Century lead mine. So this place, it first opened up back in 1771 and it closed in 1791. So it was only open for 20 years. Now the owner of this place spent around £14,000 down here on this mine, but he only made £3,000 back in lead. So that's a loss of £11,000. Plus £11,000, it's a decent bit of money to lose, but when you convert that into today's money, it ends up being around £3.5 million in losses. So this place was a disaster. It's actually the worst performing lead mine in the whole of Derbyshire at that time. That's how bad they did. The reason for that is that the miners only found 3 veins of lead down here, and only one of the veins had that much lead inside of it. So the first vein of lead, they're coming up on your left hand side in about 50 metres or so, and the miners, they named it the Little Winster vein. Now it's little because it's only half a metre wide and 1 metre tall, and Winster was the name of the 7-year-old boy who'd be working down there 12 to 14 hours a day, with 7 days a week, and the only time he had off was on a Sunday. He had 2 hours to go to church, and for all that hard work and all those hours, he would only get paid 2 pence per week, which does seem pretty bad, but when you take a look at my wages, it's not terrible. So join us this time down here, have a pickaxe in one hand, shovel in the other hand, around his neck he'll have a bucket to hold any lead that he finds, and then in his mouth he'll have a tallow candle to light the way. Now do any of you guys know what tallow is or what it's made out of? It is animal fat is what they used to make tallow candles, and around here they used to use sheep's fat to make the tallow candles. The reason for that, you've probably noticed, around these fields there's loads and loads of sheep, so what the miners will do, on the way to work, they'll go up the hillside and they'll just steal one of the sheep, they'll put all the fat in a big pot upstairs, boil it down for about 6 or 7 days, all the solids from the fat would bubble up to the surface, and that's what they used to make the tallow candles. Now there are a couple of really big problems with tallow candles though. First of all, they smell absolutely disgusting, it's a little bit like rotting meat. But definitely the worst thing about tallow candles is the fumes they give off are very toxic and corrosive to breathe in. Paul Winster and all the other miners are down here in a tiny space just breathing the fumes in all day long. So the Little Winster vein, it's just heading out on your left hand side, just before that first light. So it goes back around 30 metres or so, and as you can see, it's not really the nicest of places for a 7-year-old to be working all day long. Now, unfortunately for Paul Winster, the tallow candles I was just talking about, they did lead to his death down here. At first, they caused all of his teeth to erode away and they all fell out one by one. Secondly, his gums turned gangrenous and they had to be cut out by a doctor who definitely knew what he was doing. And finally, Paul Winster's stomach lining completely dissolved and disappeared, and his stomach acid ate away him from the inside out. It's only 2 days before his 13th birthday when he died down here. It's quite a gruesome way to go and quite a gruesome start to the tour. Hopefully, we'll get better further down. Now, I don't know if you quite say that. I think that's quite quite far away. But we're actually not alone down here. There's another boat full of people. That boat is headed straight towards us, and we're headed straight towards them. Does anyone see a problem? Okay. So we've got two options pretty much. We can go full speed, crash straight into that boat, and just hope that they sink before us. But I have to fill out lots and lots of paperwork if we do that. So what we're going to do instead is pull into this little passing point, which the miners named the halfway house. Have you guys got any wild guesses as to why they named it the halfway house?
Halfway?
That's what you'd expect. Now we measured it and it turns out exactly to the metre the halfway house is a third of the way through the tunnel. Doesn't make any sense. And the reason for that is it's not named after the distance, it's named after a pub down in Castleton which used to be called the Halfway House Inn. It's now called Ye Old Nag's Head. You might have seen it if you've been in Castleton. Pretty much the miners, they loved that pub so much they made a mini version of it down here in the caves. We'll spend all the time in there drinking moonshine. Now this moonshine, it'll be between 80 and 90% alcohol. Each miner will drink up to 1 litre of it every single day. That's roughly the equivalent of about 2.5 litres of spirits every day for the miners' lives. There's quite a bit. And the reason for them drinking that much down here was because he thought it was good for them. One day after work, a few miners went to the pub. In this pub, they met a so-called doctor, and this doctor told the miners alcohol was the only cure to lead poisoning. Because the miners, they started to drink as much as physically possible. And believe it or not, nobody died from lead poisoning after that point. In total, only 3 miners down here died from lead poisoning, but at least 65 miners died from alcohol poisoning. So alcohol poisoning was the most common cause of death down here. It killed about a third of the miners that worked here. But probably the worst part about this entire thing is the doctor that told the miners this cure, he was also the owner of the pub, so very convenient, alcohol was the cure. Now you probably noticed the other boat's not here yet. They're actually just about to leave now, I think, so we are going to have a bit of a wait, probably be about 4 minutes or so. Shouldn't be too long, I'll let them know we're here. There we go, finally continue. Again, very sorry about all the waiting that we've been doing. There we go. So, in just a moment as well, we're going to be passing the second vein of lead that the miners found down here. That's called the Longcliffe vein. When we pass the Longcliffe vein, you'll notice it's blocked off by a brick wall on both sides. So the miners that originally built these walls, we replaced them about 40 years ago, I think, just for health and safety pretty much. But I'll explain why the walls are there in just a moment. Now, behind the wall on your right hand side now, it only goes down around 10 metres or so. But behind this wall on your left hand side, it goes up 130 metres right up to the surface. And it actually leaves a hole in the top of the hill. The Longcliffe vein is where pretty much all the lead came from down here. Found about £2,500 worth of lead in there. They also got about £300 worth of lead from the Little Winster vein further down that we passed earlier. Now, it only took about 2 years of mining to get to this point, and they found £2,800 worth of lead, which in today's money, that means the boss made a profit of just under £500,000. So he was doing really, really well at the start of the mine. The only problem though is over the next 18 years, he only found £200 worth of lead, and that's how we lost the £3.5 million down here. Pretty much, he just got really unlucky after this point. So the brick walls at the Longcliffe vein as well, they were built by the miners because after they dug up to the surface, they realised to left themselves with a bit of a problem, and that was that things would sometimes fall down the Longcliffe vein and then straight onto the miners' heads. You get things like rain, mud, rocks, and every so often you even get sheep that fall down the vein. But if you've got a miner that stood at the bottom working and a sheep falls 130 metres straight onto his head, it's not going to have a fun day. So that's why they built the wall there. It's also quite useful nowadays as well. If we've got 20 people on a boat, we don't want a sheep falling on top of that boat. It doesn't look too good for us. Now, back in 1771, so when the miners first started working down here, they were only using pickaxes and shovels to get to this limestone. The limestone, you might know, is quite a hard type of rock, and these tools that they were using, they were the cheapest, worst quality tools. It's very, very slow work, but the miners realised they could use explosives instead, and it'd be much, much quicker. If you take a look up towards the ceiling now, start to notice these cylindrical grooves, or these lines that are running across the roof and the walls. These are the blast holes that the miners would drill. So one miner would have a hammer, the other one would have a chisel, who would drill between 15 and 20 of these holes to every section of the tunnel. They'll then fill the holes with an explosive called black powder, cap it off with a bit of clay, use straw as a fuse, light it, and run. For these miners, they only had about 30 seconds before the explosives went off. It'll send rock hurling down the tunnel at up to 400 miles per hour. If you get hit by one of those rocks, it's going to hurt quite a bit. Now, have any of you guys got any guesses as to where the miners could go to keep themselves safe?
Underwater.
Underwater, they did used to do that. Any other guesses as well?
Halfway house.
A halfway house, that's the answer I was looking for. So both of those are right, but the halfway house is what the miners prefer to do. So not only are the miners 100% safe in the halfway house, their favourite thing is that they can have a drink to celebrate not dying. But the big problem with the halfway house, which you might have noticed, is as we go further down this tunnel, the distance back to the halfway house gets a little bit longer. Like I said, at this point in the mine, the miners didn't have boats, they were just walking through the water. If you're a very drunk miner trying to run through a metre of water, 30 seconds doesn't get you very far, and especially after this point, no one can make it back in time. Like you said, what we'll start doing instead, like the explosives, run as far away as possible. As soon as they hear the explosives go off, they'll just dive underwater and pray that the rocks don't hit them. Now, it did work a little bit, but it wasn't perfect. A lot of the miners were still getting hit by the rocks. The only good thing about being underwater though, is the rocks are going a lot slower. So instead of being hit by a rock going 300-400 miles an hour, the miners might get hit by a rock going 40-50 miles an hour, because if you get hit by a rock going 50 miles an hour, you're going to get some pretty serious injuries, but at least most of the time the miners will survive it. Now, after this point, of course, the miners had had enough of being injured all the time, so what they decided to do was just build themselves a second halfway house, or a safety hole, as I would have called it. It's going to be on your left-hand side in a moment. This safety hole is supposed to house 8 miners and all of the tools, but the boss only gave them 2 days of work to build it. You'll see in a moment, the 2 days clearly wasn't enough time. It's very, very difficult for 8 people in there. So, just here now on your left-hand side, again, 8 miners in total were supposed to squeeze in there, and as you can see, it's never going to happen. So you're only going to get 3 or 4 miners in there at the very most. The miners did go back upstairs and they asked the boss if they could have a few more days to make the hole a bit larger. Probably tell he said no, get back to work. But luckily for the miners, just a few more meters down this tunnel, they found the 3rd and final vein of lead, which is named the Poor Man's Vein. So the original plan was to dig all the lead out and then they'd use the space left behind as a safety hole. Problem with the Poor Man's Vein though is there was pretty much no lead in there. They only found 1 bucket full, because you can't squeeze 8 miners into a hole the size of a bucket. As we pass the hole out, just to the left hand side now, you notice something quite strange. It's much, much bigger than just 1 bucket full, because what the miners did, they just lied to the boss about how much lead was in there. They told him they found tons of lead, carried on digging the stone out, and they built that safety hole in secret behind the boss's back. They did do a pretty good job. The only problem though, is after about a week of digging through that hole, the boss noticed no more lead was coming back to the surface, so he came down here to see for himself. When he saw there was no lead in there, he just fired every single miner that worked down here for lying to him. Probably the worst thing though, is that the boss wrote letters to all the other local mines and the local businesses, telling the owners of these places never to hire these 8 miners because they can't be trusted and that they're liars. These 8 miners had a bit of a problem. They couldn't find a job anywhere nearby. Their only option really was to leave the family behind in Castleton. They'll have to move to somewhere like Sheffield or Manchester, try and find a job there. If they can't find a job, they'll probably end up in one of the workhouses. And as you know, the workhouses, conditions there aren't the best. But compared to down here, it's actually a lot nicer in the workhouses, so it wasn't the worst for the miners, apart from leaving your family behind, of course. So you can probably see here, we're pretty much at the cavern now, so I'd say we've got about 5, maybe 10 minutes in the cavern. Take any photos and videos that you want in there. Now, I'm going to tell you a bit about the cavern while we're in there, but while I'm speaking, feel free to take your photos at the same time, just so you've got a little bit longer. When we get right to the end though, if everyone can stay in the seats for a second, I'm going to hop off the boat and tie the boat up. If you'll just get off the boat without tying it up, the boat will float away down the tunnel. I don't really want to go swimming after the boat, so give 1 second at the end. One final thing as well, just make sure you watch your heads when you get off the boat, because the roof's quite low. Okay everyone, so when we stood at the bottom of the stairs, we were just 23 metres underground. Where we stood now, we're almost 200 metres underground. That's because right above us is a big massive hill, it's the same one that's just behind the shop. Now both these tunnels on each side, they were man-made and dug out by the miners, but this cavern, it was naturally formed around 400 million years ago by these 2 underground saltwater runners. So the first river, it came from the very top of there, and the second river came from the very, very top there. And over thousands of years, these 2 rivers firstly eroded to the limestone. When they met here in the middle, it created this whirlpool, and that eroded the stone all the way in a big massive circle right down there to the bottom of the pit. Now when the miners first got here, this platform that we stood on now, it didn't exist. It was just a big rock into the pit. The miners built the platform around 5 years later. The first thing the miners should have done, they just climbed along the side of the wall here. They went up the makeshift ladder there, which was very safe, right up to the boulders where they were searching for lead. When they got up there though, they found absolutely nothing at all.